Nelson Mandela's life was dedicated to the struggle to set his people free.
I think one of the attributes of a leader is that he must be in it, not for himself.
We're talking about a man who was threatened with death. He was in jail, he would not bend. And when he came out, he embraced grace, forgiveness. It's hard to be that type of human.
In the fight against apartheid in South Africa, Mandela felt violence was justified. He was arrested on a charge of treason and sentenced to life imprisonment. For 27 years, he was cut off from the outside world.
One of the things that is difficult for me to comprehend is that we spent such a long time here.
Finally, in 1990, he was set free.
Today, black and white recognize that apartheid has no future. So help me God.
Forgiving his oppressors, Mandela led a new South Africa, a freedom fighter who became a symbol of peace and reconciliation across the world.
Mandela represents hope over despair, with a particular kind of vision that the impossible can be achieved.
He was the father of his country. He was a wise, good, great, but exceedingly shrewd and tough man who understood that South Africa could only go forward together.
Incredibly magnanimous, and with a wonderful capacity for including others.
In the summer of 2008, over 40,000 people gathered in London's Hyde Park for a concert.
For Nelson Mandela, let me see your hands.
Mandela was celebrating his birthday.
Looking pretty good for 90.
Ladies and gentlemen, the one, the only, the birthday boy, Nelson Mandela!
Mandela was so widely loved and respected that he could persuade the rich, the famous, and the world's public to support him in his campaigns.
Tonight, we can stand before you free. But let us remind ourselves that our work is far from complete. Where there is poverty and sickness, including AIDS, where human beings are being oppressed, there is more work to be done. Our work is for freedom for all.
Mandela's own fight for freedom took him on a remarkable journey that began nearly a century ago. He was born in 1918 in South Africa, a country where black people were oppressed by a white minority. His home was in this remote village in the region of the Transkei. He invited me to join him here in 2003, during the course of recording a series of interviews with him.
This is an opportunity for me to come back here, I do, because it evokes very pleasant memories, my being here.
What kind of memories?
Of childhood.
Raised in a large family, Mandela was only 9 when his father died, and he went to live with his uncle, a tribal leader. He was a hard-working boy and the first in his family to go to school.
That time, the government took no interest whatsoever in the education of blacks. It was the missionaries who bought land, who put up buildings, who furnished them, who employed and paid teachers. And that is how I was brought up.
When he was 19, he was sent to study at a Methodist college, his introduction to a wider world. Here he heard for the first time about the ANC, the African National Congress, the party which was fighting for black South Africans.
People were not talking so much about traditional leaders, but we're talking about modern leaders. This opened my eyes to something totally different. And all that was shaping my attitude.
Mandela's family expected him to take on the responsibilities of a tribal leader. But he had other ideas. He ran away, and that decision took Mandela for the first time to the great city of Johannesburg. Life in the city was strictly segregated. His lodgings were in a township reserved for black people. He once said he'd never seen such poverty. Like many new arrivals, he found a job in the gold mines, working as a night watchman. There he saw at first hand the indignity suffered by the black population in a country dominated by white people.
Yeah. I think you better have an X-ray. There you are.
The young Mandela, known as Madiba to his friends, was content to ignore politics and enjoy life. He took up boxing, hoping he might one day be a champion. He enjoyed dancing and other nightlife attractions that Johannesburg offered.
Our hero was Victor Sylvester, the chap who was a ballroom champion. And we tried to imitate him. Then we did the waltz and the tango, you know, and so on. But I was never a champion. But I liked dancing.
At one point you were a kind of man about town. I mean, you got all the best girls and...
No, that's true.
It's true, is it? You're not ashamed to say so.
Oh, no. I mean, it's history. People know.
We think of him now, and the world thinks of him now as a great statesman, as an icon practically. And yet, he was a young man once. And I knew him when he was young, and vibrant and warm and friendly and naughty.
When he was 26, Mandela married. His wife, Evelyn, was a nurse. They had 3 children. Compared to most black people, Mandela was well educated. He enrolled as a law student. A senior member of the ANC spotted him and got him a job as a legal clerk. His name was Walter Sisulu, and he became the most important influence on Mandela's life.
He struck me at once to be the type of a man I had been looking for. I look upon him as a future leader himself. He had qualities which I knew would be useful in our movement.
Mandela joined the ANC in 1944. He helped set up a radical youth wing determined to fight the growing nationalism of the main white minority, the Afrikaners.
Ek is 'n Afrikaner. My verhaal is die verhaal van 'n nuwe volk met 'n nuwe taal op nuwe bodem.
The 1948 election brought the Afrikaner nationalists to power. Racism and segregation, long common practice, were now enshrined in law. Black people had to carry passes to be in white-only areas. They had to use separate entrances, separate seats, in effect lead separate lives.
Our policy is one which is called by an Afrikaans word apartheid. And I'm afraid that has been misunderstood so often. It could just as easily, and perhaps much better, be described as a policy of good neighborliness.
To fight apartheid, Mandela joined forces with another ANC activist, Oliver Tambo. They founded the first black law firm in South Africa.
I met him for the first time practicing with Oliver Tambo. And already at that time, you saw this sense of even-handedness. I just thought he was a handsome, tall guy. But I didn't think, that he was going to cause a great deal of a splash. How wrong we can be, yes.
Much of Mandela's work was defending black people against the rigid pass law offences. But he also took the fight against injustice to the streets.
In Johannesburg, premier city of South Africa, thousands of coloured people went to attend a protest meeting called by the African National Congress.
The ANC started a defiance campaign, refusing to cooperate with laws they considered unjust. By opposing the authorities, Mandela risked jail, but he wanted to keep the protest peaceful.
We hated the apartheid regime. We didn't want to have anything to do with them. But our brains said, if you don't talk to these people, this country is going to go up in smoke.
The white government rejected dialogue. Instead, as opposition to apartheid grew, they tried to suppress it by force. Mandela was arrested with 155 others, charged with plotting against the state. The treason trial, as it was known, dragged on for 4.5 years. Outside the courtroom, a new face could be seen among the crowd. Mandela had met and fallen in love with a social worker, Winnie Madikizela. His marriage to Evelyn had ended in divorce, and 2 years into the trial, he married Winnie.
When he met Winnie, it was the end of the other girlfriends in a sense. He adored her. He loved her tremendously. Winnie was the main attraction in his life.
But life with Winnie was never going to be easy.
He telephoned me and jokingly told me that he had married trouble. His wife was up on a charge of assaulting a policeman. I defended her successfully. That pleased him no end, and that started a relationship. Amongst the three of us, I think that I probably defended her about 20 times during a period of 25 years.
Eventually, the treason trial came to an end, and the judges reached a verdict: not guilty. The defendants celebrated, determined to continue their campaign. But white South Africa, feeling increasingly threatened, prepared for the worst.
Demonstrations against the South African government's strict apartheid policies flare into shocking violence.
March 1960, a crowd of 10,000 protested in Sharpeville. The police response was devastating.
The crowd refused to disperse. Police opened fire into the crowd from behind a wire.
69 were killed, many shot in the back while running away. The authorities were unrepentant. Mandela made a public display of burning his pass, urging others to do the same. The government responded by declaring a state of emergency the ANC was banned. Now a wanted man, Mandela was forced to leave his family and go underground, always on the move, traveling in disguise. By this time, he was becoming impatient at the failure of peaceful protest. His thoughts were turning to other methods.
It was quite clear that the apartheid regime did not want to have any discussions with us. And I was the man who proposed that we should take up arms.
Did you have any doubts about crossing the Rubicon of violence?
No, I was determined that the time had come.
There are many people who feel that it is useless and futile for us to continue talking peace and non-violence against a government whose reply is only savage attacks on an unarmed and defenseless people.
The idea in my mind was not that we were going to win, but that we were going to focus the attention of the world on our demands.
Mandela now established a new military wing of the ANC. Their targets were power supplies and government buildings. The aim was to avoid loss of life, but Mandela later wrote that if sabotage failed, he'd adopt other methods. You said you were starting with sabotage, but you said that if that didn't work, you'd consider terrorism and guerrilla warfare. How far is it right to go?
We never embarked on terrorism.
But you said you would if sabotage didn't work, didn't you? You wrote it you would.
Terrorism means any individual, organization, or state that targets innocent individuals. That's what terrorism is. We never did.
In 1962, Mandela left South Africa illegally to raise funds and recruit fighters throughout Africa.
We made it clear that your object is military targets. Part of my training was what they call demolition work. I was expert in exploding bombs.
When Mandela returned to South Africa, the intelligence services were on his trail. On the road to Johannesburg, he was arrested and charged with leaving the country without a passport. At his trial, Mandela denounced the proceedings against him, saying he was a black man being wrongly tried in a white man's court, and he defiantly wore his traditional dress. Found guilty, he was sentenced to 5 years in jail. But the ANC continued their campaign. A year later, at a farmhouse in Rivonia near Johannesburg, the entire top leadership was arrested. Police found plans for sabotage and guerrilla warfare, which implicated Mandela. He and his colleagues now faced serious charges of plotting against the state. If convicted, they faced the death penalty.
I said to our chaps, we are going to die in any case. Let's disappear under a cloud of glory. Let's show them that we can use their platform to fight them.
Facing the gallows, Mandela turned the courtroom into a political platform with a dramatic speech from the dock.
The idea of a democratic and free society, it is an idea for which I hope to live for and to see realized. But my Lord, if it need be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die.
After an agonizing 3-week delay, the judge finally gave his verdict.
Right up to the time when the judge said, stand up for your sentence on the 12th of June 1964, we expected the death sentence. There was a collective sigh of relief when he said, life imprisonment with hard labor.
I shall never lose hope, and my people shall never lose hope. In fact, we expect that the work will go on.
The vast majority of the white people expected the death sentence to be imposed, and they were disappointed that it was not.
What was their view of Mandela then?
He was a terrorist. If you asked 10 white people what was Mandela's occupation, 9 would not have known that he was an attorney. He was just a black terrorist.
Mandela and his co-defendants were sent to Robben Island, an isolated prison from which escape was impossible. They'd avoided the death penalty, but faced an indeterminate sentence in jail. Years after he was freed, we took Mandela and his former colleague Kathrada back to Robben Island.
Which is mine now? Number 4.
Mandela's home measured 8 foot by 7. He slept on the floor and had a bucket known as a bali for a toilet.
Those are not the balis we had, remember? Our balis were smaller.
Oh, I see. One of the things that is difficult for me to comprehend is that we spent such a long time here. Of course, there were painful moments because the apartheid regime was an expert in persecuting people psychologically.
When we first arrived here, the warders had been indoctrinated to believe that these were subhuman. They were trying to break us down, crush our spirits, so that they could have a very subservient group of prisoners.
For 13 years, Mandela was given hard labor. He was forced to quarry limestone. Always defiant, he resisted attempts by the guards to humiliate and bully him.
They use an expression which is used when you're driving oxen. In Afrikaans, hak. Now, we resented that.
It was Nelson who said, comrades, let's be slower than ever. It was clear, therefore, that the steps we're taking would make it impossible ever to reach the quarry where we were going to. They were compelled to negotiate with Nelson.
Kijk, jy kon definitief oplet dat Nelson Mandela is.
You could definitely see that Nelson Mandela was the leader. When he spoke to them, they would stop or work or whatever he told them. I watched Nelson Mandela for 2 hours the way he was working. It took him 10 minutes to lift his pickaxe, lift it from the ground above his head. 10 minutes. I charged him, and he was sentenced to only receiving rice water.
One of Mandela's heaviest burdens was being separated from Winnie.
She was my wife. I had 2 children with her. I loved her. I thought about her very often, and thus reflected in my letters to her.
But private mail was another weapon used against the prisoners.
Die beleid was deur die hoof van die gevangenis geplaas op daai stadium.
The head of the prison enforced a policy that we should try to break the prisoners down by censoring letters. We mixed up their correspondence so they lost contact with their families.
Kontak verloor met hulle mense buite.
The prisoners knew we were burning letters when they picked up the bits. They were very upset.
Hulle was baie ontstel.
Family visits were severely restricted. Winnie was only allowed to see Mandela every 6 months. His 2 young daughters were refused permission to visit for 10 years. When his son was killed in a car crash, Mandela wasn't allowed to the funeral, nor to his mother's when she died a year later. Mandela had now been in jail for 12 years, but the government had still not succeeded in crushing black opposition. In 1976, the black youths of a new generation protested against apartheid on the streets of Soweto.
What started as a peaceful protest degenerated into a rampage, which left hundreds dead and cost the country an estimated 50 million rand.
The young ringleaders were arrested and sent to Robben Island. There they came face to face with Mandela and the old guard of the ANC.
Mandela has been here with all these people. Are they still the same? That was the main question. Are they as revolutionary as us? Are they fighters? Is that spirit of freedom still alive? The fire in their bellies, like us?
The newly arrived firebrands were gradually won round by Walter Sisulu and Mandela, who'd been elected leader of the ANC prisoners. Were you proud to be chosen?
Proud in the sense that that was an honor. At the same time, the impression that you are a demigod worried me. I wanted to be regarded just like an ordinary human being with virtues and vices.
The ANC was still outlawed. It was illegal even to publish its name or to refer to Mandela. The government hoped that the memory of him would fade. But his wife's defiance kept Mandela's name alive.
We are fighting for a South Africa which can only be led by him. He is the only hope for this country.
That lady made a massive contribution towards the struggle. There was one time when she became almost a pillar of the organization inside the country.
Outside South Africa, support for Mandela was growing.
Nelson Mandela had this almost mystical impact because of his power, because of his dignity, and that transmitted itself even from his incarceration in those cold cells in Robben Island. And it gradually seeped out into
change and understanding taking place. It was a real point of arrival where young people said, this is not acceptable.
Our cause was now supported by the entire world, and apartheid South Africa was a polecat of the world, was completely isolated.
I want you to scream out loud and clear 5 times. How long? How long? Again!
The following year, white South Africa elected a new president, F.W. de Klerk. He realized that Mandela held the key to any settlement. Mandela had been moved to the comfort of a prison warder's house near Cape Town. De Klerk began secret talks with him about a political settlement that would set him free. But when ANC colleagues visited Mandela, they were suspicious.
When we reached there, beautiful home, this is not a prison, wine farming area, swimming pool. microwaves, television sets, I concluded he has sold us out.
The story went sweeping through the country that Mandela was selling out. You would hesitate to say it as a colleague of Mandela. But lurking there was the idea that when you're alone in a corner, they have all the resources. They will bait you into a trap.
But Mandela did not sell out.
I was confident that when it came to argument that we want all the rights of citizenship in our country, we were superior to them. At times there were about 5 of them, sometimes 6, but I was alone, so I had to prepare my case very well.
Mandela's demands were clear: equal rights and equal votes for everyone. His refusal to compromise gave the government no choice.
It became clear to me that he has a pivotal role to play, and that he was playing it irrespective of the fact that he was in jail.
I wish to put it plainly that the government has taken a firm decision to release Mr. Mandela unconditionally. I am serious about bringing this matter to finality without delay.
February the 11th, 1990. The world waited to see Mandela's face for the first time in over a quarter of a century. He had won his freedom on his terms.
This is the hour. This is the hour the world has been waiting for.
With friends and family at his side, Mandela prepared to walk to freedom.
It was early on a Sunday morning in Arkansas. I got my daughter up, took her down, we turned on the television, and we watched him walk to freedom together. I'll never forget it.
There's Mr. Mandela, Mr. Nelson Mandela, a free man taking his first steps into a new South Africa.
When I saw that crowd, it aroused feelings of excitement I couldn't control, I couldn't describe.
Nobody believed that they would ever live to see this day. And, you know, we all felt that we were part of this thing. I felt that I was liberated. I felt that I was free, having seen this man after so many years, free.
Mandela made his way to Cape Town, where a huge crowd waited to hear him speak for the first time as a free man.
Today, the majority of South Africans, black and white, recognize that apartheid has no future.
Mandela was at last reunited with his wife, Winnie. But it wasn't the happy homecoming he'd longed for. Winnie's defiant support of her husband had come at a price. She too had been persecuted and imprisoned, but her own wayward behavior had lost her sympathy. While Mandela was in jail, Winnie had recruited a young gang to protect her. They were known as the Mandela United Football Club. They were implicated in the murder of a 14-year-old boy, and Winnie was charged with kidnap and assault.
I feel sad about her, because there is so much that she did. And yet, when she stumbled and people tried, including Madiba, to give her that support, she failed to respond.
Mandela stood by her during her trial, and she escaped with a suspended sentence. But his loyalty was being sorely tested. Winnie was having an affair, and there'd been allegations of other infidelities while he was in prison. 2 years after he left jail, Mandela bowed to the inevitable.
we have mutually agreed that a separation would be best for each one of us. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you'll appreciate the pain I have gone through.
Mandela's release and the government's willingness to negotiate with him triggered a power struggle between the ANC and a rival political group, the Zulu Inkatha movement. Violence between the two groups threatened to destroy any hope of a peaceful settlement. Mandela urged young ANC supporters to make peace.
Take your guns, your knives, and your pangas, and throw them into the sea.
What was your reaction when you heard your words just fall on such stony ground?
I was not surprised. That's why I said, if I am your leader, you have to listen to me. And if you don't want to listen to me, then drop me as your leader.
Against this background of uncertainty, negotiations began for the future of South Africa. Mandela, once considered a terrorist, was now the peacemaker.
The first meeting was very impressive. His statement there, I will never forget. It was with no bitterness, no vengefulness, not a sign of hatred. At no stage did he endeavor to exploit or use his 27 years in prison. There was a statesman speaking as if he was never in prison.
Talks were painstakingly slow, but an event outside the negotiating room brought the urgency of the task into focus.
The assassination of Chris Hani has shocked South Africa and triggered fears in a country where violence and retaliation are commonplace.
Chris Hani was one of the country's most popular black politicians. His assassination by a white extremist threatened to trigger all-out race war. An outburst of rioting and looting left 70 dead. Only one man now had the authority to calm the country.
They saw the urgency of the situation. I think everybody understood that this is it. So there was no argument. And that evening, he entered the television station. For the first time, live.
We are a nation in mourning. Our pain and anger is real. Yet we must not permit ourselves to be provoked by those who seek to deny us the very thing Chris Hani gave his life for.
This is the defining moment when Nelson Mandela really assumed the reins, because he had to rescue a terrible situation in the country. In effect, Mandela became president on that day.
The negotiations for free elections took 4 years. But for the first time in April 1994, black South Africans were given an equal vote with whites. 23 million people went to the polls.
We were turning a new page in the history of South Africa. This was in my mind as I cast that ballot paper.
People can't believe it when we say, hey, I'm free. I'm free, and you're walking tall. And cloud 9. Well, that's too low.
The outcome of the election was never in doubt. The ANC won power, Nelson Mandela was the new president, and the world came to the capital, Pretoria, to pay tribute to the man who'd led South Africa out of its nightmare.
yo lo veía dueño del futuro de Sudáfrica. Yo lo veía símbolo, paradigma de líder político y de hombre.
I never imagined that the world would give us the support we enjoyed, and to be known as a miracle country. I had never expected that, but that gave us a lot of pride.
I, Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela, do hereby swear to be faithful to the Republic of South Africa.
The election of Mandela was not a magic wand that could be waved to heal the wounds of old hatreds. Mandela realized he had to reach out to the white minority, and he did so by embracing their powerful tribal symbol, rugby. It was the World Cup final, the South African Springboks against the New Zealand All Blacks.
I went round the stadium. I did not expect such an ovation.
A momentous occasion, unbelievable occasion. And there was Madiba wearing a Springbok jumper. I thought, wow. And in his very calm, collective way, sincere way, he wished the guys well. And then he turned around. And when he turned around, I saw, and it was my number. And I was just, that's it, you know, I was ready to run through anything and do whatever is necessary to win this game. Any other president in the world would have worn his best suit. Here comes a guy that was incarcerated, supporting a white man's game, wearing a white man's jumper. Incredible. I couldn't sing. I was biting my lower lip because I knew if I opened my mouth I would start to cry. I was just so proud, unbelievably proud.
In the closing minutes, the Springboks scored a drop goal and won the match, and with it, the World Cup.
It wasn't a victory for white South Africa. This was a victory for all of South Africa. And he was, you know, he was there sharing it with us. Let's follow the detractors' route and say it was a very shrewd political move. Okay, fine. But the way in which he carried that political move was just tremendous.
If they can just show us the bones of my child, I will be grateful. Where did they leave the bones of my child? Where did they take him?
The toughest challenge Mandela faced was to persuade South Africa to forget the horrors of the past and not seek revenge. At public hearings, victims were encouraged to confront their aggressors, who escaped prosecution if they confessed.
He took my genitals,
Mr. X, why vala ithrow?
And Mr. X shut the drawer. He squeezed.
What kind of man, listening to those moans and cries and groans, and taking each of those people very near to their deaths, what kind of man is that? Not only you have asked me that question.
If we don't forgive them, then that feeling of bitterness and revenge will be there. And we are saying, let us forget the past. Let's concern ourselves with the present and the future. But to say the atrocities of the past will never be allowed to happen again.
My wife was sitting right at the door where you came in. She was wearing a long blue coat. Can you remember if you shot her?
When he says, guys, we've got to forgive. Nobody could say you are being facile, you are talking glibly about forgiveness. What do you know about suffering? 27 years, you know.
We are sorry for what we have done. It was the situation in South Africa.
He did something almost historically unique.
We are asking from you, please do forgive us.
It raised the prospect that people could be held accountable without being punished in a traditional sense. This is something virtually without precedent in humanity.
On his 80th birthday, Mandela married once more. His third wife was Graça Machel, widow of the president of Mozambique, who died 12 years earlier.
The beginning of our closeness, if I can say, it was two people who had been very hurt by life. That sense of being lonely and trying to find answers for very deep sense of pain and loss. I think that's what sparkled our connection.
Take off your shoes and your skirt and go and jump there with her.
Between them, Nelson and Graça had 45 grandchildren and great-grandchildren.
Madiba had very little of family life before. He was married, he had children, but because of his obligations, he never had time to have a normal family life. It was that possibility again of him regaining a family and the space where you take away all your defenses and you are just a human being.
At the end of his 5-year term as president, Mandela kept his promise to step down, but had no intention of leaving the stage.
I'll have to get you the Sowetan.
Oh, I see.
I'll get it now.
Retirement didn't change the hectic pace of his life.
You'll get me these people too. You know, Kat Osman.
Yeah.
And then I'd like to speak to the Pope. And then to President Putin. And then Sukarno Putri.
Okay.
He used his pulling power with world leaders and celebrities to raise millions for children, education, and AIDS, an issue which he'd been criticized for ignoring while president. He established a charity to help fight the disease, which claims hundreds of lives every day in South Africa. He called it after his prison number, 46664.
A silent serial killer stalks the land.
Mandela was no longer president, and now we're looking at an elderly statesman who had realised that the HIV/AIDS pandemic was ravaging the country, and the message is no longer about apartheid, obviously. The message was that a genocide was taking place in his country.
Mandela's global campaign was brought home to him personally when Magoto, his only surviving son, died of AIDS in 2005. Mandela chose to speak publicly about the cause of his death.
It gives a very bad reflection indeed to the members of the family that they themselves should not come out and say bravely that a member of my family has died of AIDS. That's why we took the initiative to say a member of our family has died. In this particular case, my son.
I was the one who told my dad about Khatu's condition, you know. And I know the day that I told him how he reacted, you know, like any other, you know, normal parent would react. It was not an easy thing for him to accept. I think for him, who has been a role model, you know, in this country in many, many spheres, it was important for him to come out and say, look, my son also had HIV, lived with HIV and died.
Mandela lent his support to other campaigns. On a winter's day, he came to London to ask a crowd of 20,000 to make poverty history.
He's hugely personable. He holds your hand, he beams and lights up. He is properly the real deal. Any sort of things, oh my God, it's Mandela, and you remember all his life, and then you meet him, and it's that plus.
As long as poverty, injustice, and gross inequality persist in our world, none of us can truly rest.
Ladies and gentlemen, Nelson Mandela.
Nelson Mandela's 90th birthday concert in Hyde Park was his last visit to London. The famous anthem of 20 years earlier was sung in tribute.
His legacy is himself. He was a huge influence on the world. To see the terrible regime of apartheid be dismantled is an extraordinary testament to his tenacity and his strength.
He taught us something about peace and reconciliation in stoically enduring 27 years of imprisonment and abuse and coming out on the other side of it without rancor or bitterness and asking people to put their anger behind.
People need symbols. People need inspiration. What was he looking for? He's looking for freedom. Not for himself. It is freedom for all of these others.
After nearly 90 years of life, it is time for new heads to lift the burdens. It is in your hands now. I thank you.
At the closing ceremony of the 2010 Football World Cup, with his wife Graça at his side, Nelson Mandela made one of his last public appearances. 85,000 spectators rose to their feet to welcome Madiba, the father of their nation, a man who'd sacrificed his liberty for their freedom.
If I had to live again, I would do exactly the same thing. As long as our people were oppressed and deprived of everything to make human beings happy and to enjoy life, it was my duty to be involved. And I would do it over and over again. My family was here, and I would like to be buried here at home. But I don't want to take long about death and so on. Okay.
My lords, ladies and gentlemen, it is with a deep sense of humility that we stand here today to address the historic Houses of Parliament of the United Kingdom. The rare honor you have extended to a foreigner speaks to the great age, the extent, and the warmth of the relations between our two peoples. It speaks of the prospect of us further deepening these excellent relations. Perhaps the fact that we are here today might serve to close a circle which is 200 years old. I say 200 years because the first time this country entered ours as a colonizing power was the year 1795. There are some parts of our country which to this day have many towns and localities which bear the names of British places and personalities, some of whom played an important role in the process of British colonization, which started in 1795. To take only one of these, the Eastern Cape, it has such names as Port Elizabeth, East London, Grahamstown, King Williamstown, Alice, Albany, Somerset East, Fort Beaufort, Fort Glamorgan, and simple Queenstown. Here too is to be found what is called the 1820 Settlers Monument, built in tribute to British colonists who came to occupy land seized from our forebears and to help guarantee the safety of the spoils for the benefit of country and empire. Had those forebears had the advantage of education and access to your outstanding cultural heritage, they would have found that the words of one of the citizens in Shakespeare's Coriolanus most apposite to describe their attitude towards the Great Britain of the day. Let us hear the disenfranchised and dispossessed citizens of that day, and I quote, "We are accounted poor citizens. The patricians good. What authorities serve us on would relieve us. The leanness that afflicts us, the object of our misery, is an inventory to particularize their abundance. Our sufferance is a gain to them. Let us revenge this with our pigs, ere we become rakes. For the gods know I speak this in hunger for bread, and not in thirst for revenge, unquote. For a century after that cry of despair would first have been heard, what defined the relations between our peoples was the continuous clangor of arms, one of whose military highlights was the famous Battle of Itsangon, when the Zulu armies won the day. 8 decades ago, my predecessors in the leadership of the African National Congress came to these venerable houses to say to the government and the legislature of that time that they, the patricians, should come to the aid of the poor citizens with no pigs to accompany them, because the British armies had defeated and disarmed them. They spoke eloquently and passionately of the need for the colonial power to treat them as human beings, equal to the 1820 settlers and others who wafted down from Europe before and after 1820. As eloquently and passionately, the British rulers of the day spoke in these houses to say they could not and would not amend their agenda with regard to South Africa to address the interests of that section of our population which was not white. Despite that rebuff and the terrible cost we had to bear as a consequence, we returned to this honored place, neither with pigs, nor a desire for revenge, nor even a plea to your distinguished selves to assuage our hunger for bread. We come to you as friends. We have returned to the land of William Wilberforce, who dared to stand up to demand that the slaves in our country should be freed. We have come to the land of Fenner Brockway, who through his movement for colonial freedom was as concerned about our liberty as he was about the independence of India. We are in the houses in which Harold Macmillan worked. He who spoke in our Houses of Parliament in Cape Town in 1960, shortly before the infamous Sharpeville massacre, and warned a stubborn and race-blinded white oligarchy in our country that, and quote, the wind of change is blowing through this continent, unquote. He to whom a South African cartoonist paid tribute by having him recite other Shakespearean words, and I quote, "Oh, pardon me, thou bleeding piece of earth, that I am meek and gentle with these butchers," unquote. We have come as friends to all the people of the native land of Archbishop Trevor Huddleston, who in his gentle compassion for the victim resolved to give no quarter to any butcher. His sacrifices for our freedom told us that the true relationship between our people was not one between poor citizens on the one hand and good patricians on the other, but one underwritten by our common humanity and our human capacity to touch one another's hearts across the oceans. We come to you as friends, bearing with us to you and the nation you represent. Warm greetings from the heart of millions of our citizens. Even in the most lifeless of historical seasons, 200 years would be too long a period for the force of change not to break free. Change has come to our country, too, perhaps at last, but bringing with it joy, the promise of a better future and a protracted festival of hope across the globe. Racism is a blight on the human conscience. The idea that any people can be inferior to another, to the point where those who consider themselves superior define and treat the rest as subhuman, denies the humanity even of those who elevate themselves to the status of God. The millions of graves strewn across Europe, which are the result of the tyranny of Nazism, the decimation of the native peoples of the Americas and Australia, the destructive trail of the apartheid crime against humanity, all these are like a haunting question that floats in the wind. Why did we allow this to happen? It seems to us that as the ordinary people of the world came to understand that the real nature of the system of apartheid, it seems to us that as the ordinary people of the world came to understand the real nature of the system of apartheid, they decided that they would not permit that their response to that question should be to hang their heads in shame. We take this opportunity once more to pay tribute to the millions of Britons who through the years, and like others everywhere else in the world, stood up to say no to apartheid. Our emancipation is their reward. We know that the freedom we enjoy is a richly textured gift handcrafted by ordinary folk who would not allow that their own dignity as human beings should be insulted. In the acceptance of that gift is contained an undertaking by our people that we shall never, never again allow our country to play host to racism, nor shall our voices be stilled if we see that another elsewhere in the world is victim to racial tyranny. But above all else, we believe that our charge is to fulfill the wishes of all humanity, including our own people, to ensure that the enormous and sustained universal effort which translated into the defeat of the system of apartheid achieves its related purpose of transforming South Africa into a democratic, non-racial, non-sexist, peaceful and prosperous country. No society emerging out of the grand disaster represented by the apartheid system could avoid to carry the blemishes of its past. Had the new South Africa emerged out of nothing, it would not exist. The being it has assumed, dictated by its origins, constitutes a veritable school of learning about what needs to be done still to end the system of apartheid. The Jeremiahs who lie in wait, ready to blame the present for its past, and sing the ghost of the past that still stalk our land, believe these ghosts to represent the failure of the new reality. These Jeremiahs represent a breed that has convinced itself that we cannot succeed to build the beautiful South Africa that we and millions of others, including yourselves, have dared to dream of. Yet, had we not had that capacity for success, South Africa would not be where it is today. The first founding stone of our new country is national reconciliation and national unity. The fact that it has settled in its mortar needs no advertising. If it were not so, the blood in the streets would trumpet it loudly that we had failed to achieve acceptance of the need for all our people, black and white, to live together in peace as equals and as citizens bound together by a common destiny. Our second founding stone is the establishment of a democratic system which ensures that all citizens have an equal right and an equal possibility to determine their future. It prohibits the option of tyranny and dictatorship, and it guarantees the fundamental human rights of all our people. Within that broad framework, like other nations, we continue the struggle to find ways and means by which to involve the citizen as intimately as possible in the system of government, cognizant of the historical process which is redefining the role of the politician, taking away from these professions the powers conferred by the notion that they exclusively have a special ability to govern. Furthermore, recognizing the diversity of our society, our new Constitution provides for the establishment of a commission for the promotion and protection of the rights of cultural, religious, and linguistic communities. This will ensure that our people as a whole have an additional instrument in their hands to enable them to avoid the emergence of any situation in which ethnic and other tensions might drive us back to apartheid solutions or to an imitation of the cruel example of Bosnia. Our third founding stone must surely be that we end the enormous race and gender disparities in wealth, income, and opportunity we have inherited from our past, and whose continued impact on our society necessarily subtracts from the achievement of the goals of national unity and reconciliation. Here we are confronted with a protracted struggle which is intimately bound up with our fourth founding stone, this being the rebuilding and modernization of our economy and setting it on a high, sustainable growth path to end poverty unemployment, and backwardness. None of us can underestimate the complexity of the challenge that faces us with regard to the laying of these latter two founding stones. At the same time, relying on our own resources and people, and as part of the world community of nations, we have every reason to be certain that we will succeed. In this context, we must refer to the mood of the masses of our people, who correctly expect that freedom must be attended by a better life for all. But because they are poor, these millions understand the effort and time it will take to graduate from walking barefoot to the comforts of a truly decent existence. What they expect is not a great leap forward, but a steady and visible advance in the improvement of the quality of their lives, with them participating actively in the process of determining the pace and direction of that advance, and not merely waiting passively to be a recipient of benefits that will be delivered by an authority from which they are otherwise alienated. It may be difficult to understand the enormous creative force released amongst the people by the fact that for the first time in centuries, they have a government which they can correctly claim as their own, and whose very reason for existence is to serve the interests of those millions, and that they are builders of a society in which the individual is by law protected against any possible tyranny from state. It is from this well of hope, engagement, and confidence in the future that the ordinary citizens of our country are appropriating the concept we have laid before them of masakane, a Nguni word which means let us build one another together. As important a founding stone as the rest is the fact that we are an African country with all our colors and races combined in one nation. We are an African people. The successes we seek and must achieve in politics, the economy, and social development are African successes which must be part of an African renaissance. They are integrated within a process which must lift and banish the clouds of despair that continue to cast a dark shadow over our continent. Had we the peremptory powers, long would we have proclaimed Lux Fiat. It is perhaps in this regard that our presence here today might, as we have said, symbolizing the closing of a circle which for us has been 2 centuries in the drawing. For centuries, an Asian continent has bled from many gaping sword wounds. At an earlier time, it lost millions of its most able sons and daughters to a trade in slaves, which defined these Africans as fit for slavery because they were African. To this day, we continue to lose some of the best amongst ourselves because of the lights in the developed world shine brighter. An Asian continent disgorged into the hands of foreigners what lay in its bowels and in the fertility of its soils, seemingly to profusely that it had to send scouts, seemingly so profusely that it had to send scouts here to ascertain whether it was true that the streets of London are paved with gold. The continent bleeds still, struggling to service a foreign debt it can neither afford nor afford to repudiate. The louder and more piercing the cries of despair, even when that despair results in 500,000 dead in Rwanda, the more these cries seem to encourage an instinctive reaction to raise our heads so as to close our eyes and ears. Both of us have been part of this unfolding tragedy, watching, waiting, troubled, not knowing what beast born of this superhuman suffering slouches towards Bethlehem to be born, to borrow the words of an Irish poet. But this youth must know that none of us can insulate ourselves from so catastrophic a scale of human suffering. In the end, the cries of the infant who dies because of hunger or because a machete has slit open its stomach will penetrate the noises of the modern city and its sealed windows to say, am I not human too? To close the circle, let our peoples, the ones of formerly poor citizens, and the others, good patricians, politicians, business people, educators, health workers, scientists, engineers, and technicians, sports people and entertainers, activists for charitable relief, join hands to build on what we have achieved together and help construct a humane African world whose emergence will say a new universal order is born in which we are each our brothers or sisters' keeper. And so let that outcome, as we close the chapter of 2 centuries and open a millennium, herald the advent of a glorious summer of a partnership for freedom, peace, prosperity, and friendship. I thank you.
May I, on behalf of everybody on the platform who has spoken, ask you to join us, everybody here, Your Excellencies, my lords, ladies and gentlemen, all those people who have to be formally committed and thanked, to ask now if we may persuade Madiba to speak just a few words to us. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, friends, firstly, please allow me to congratulate our friend, Gordon Brown, on his new position as Prime Minister of Britain. We are confident that his leadership will not only reinforce Britain's position on the world stage, but serve the British people and the world at large with distinction. Gordon, we wish you strength and great wisdom for your term of office. It is an honor for us to be with you on the occasion of the unveiling of this statue today. From the moment Donald Woods initiated the project to when Ian Walters came to my home in Kunu to begin the statue, we never dreamt we would all be here today. Though this statue is of one man, it should in actual fact symbolize all those who have resisted oppression, especially in my country. The history of the struggle in South Africa is rich with the stories of heroes and heroines, some of them leaders, some of them followers. All of them deserve to be remembered. When Oliver Tambo and I visited Westminster Abbey and Parliament Square in 1962, we half joked that we hoped that one day a statue of a black person would be erected here alongside that of General Smuts. Oliver would have been proud today if you were here. We thank the British people once again for their relentless efforts in supporting us during the dark years. We remember the Free Mandela campaign and the time we gathered in 1990 at Wembley Stadium following our release
from prison. We are proud to announce that in celebration of my 90th birthday next year, my international AIDS campaign, called 46664, will once again call on you as a British nation to gather on the 27th of June, 2008, 46664 will host a concert in Hyde Park. I want very much to be back in London to attend this concert, and I hope to see you there. It remains for me to acknowledge my gratitude to all who have made this day possible. We trust that the statue will be a reminder of heroes and heroines past, as well as an inspiration for continuing struggle against injustice. I thank you.